Okay, good morning, everybody. To those of you joining from the UK, and good afternoon to those of you joining from China, and welcome to today's CBBC webinar, which is on the subject of cash flow in China, 6 secrets of cash flow in China. Obviously a very important issue for any company operating or looking to operate in the China market. We're lucky enough today to have Andy Clayton, the CEO of LNP China, to talk us through this interesting topic. Before I hand across to Andy, just a few words about the China-Britain Business Council. CBBC is the main organisation in the UK helping UK businesses to do business in China. This is our 60th anniversary. We've been helping UK companies since the 1950s, and we're widely recognised and respected at the highest levels in both China and here in the UK. We provide market entry support services to businesses at any stage of market entry, whether or not they're looking to set up an office in China, they're exporting for the first time, or looking to expand their presence and already established in the market. We work with companies of all sizes and from all sectors, and we have a very powerful UK and China network. We have a team of around 130 people, and we're also merged with the British Chambers of Commerce in Beijing. We're also UKTI's service delivery partner in China, delivering all of UKTI's trade services in China. Just to give you a sense of our network, we have a network of 13 offices in China, and we're also present in 10 different regions of the UK. So we're there for any of you that are thinking about China and need some support and advice. Now, just before I hand across to Andy, you'll see that there is a webinar tool panel. On that panel, on the left-hand side, there's a number of tools that you can use. I just want to check that everyone can hear me. So you'll see that on the left-hand side, there is a raise your hand icon. I'd just like everyone to click that, just so I can check that everyone can hear me. Okay, I'll just give that a couple of seconds. Okay, that's great. I can hear that all of you can hear me loud and clear, so that's fantastic. You'll also see at the bottom of the panel there is a box there. Please feel free to use that box to ask questions throughout the presentation, and we'll pass those on to Andy as we go through. So this is designed to be an interactive platform, so please do feel free to ask any questions either as we go through or at the end. With that, I'll hand across to Andy. Andy, LNP China, they provide a range of back office services and support for foreign companies entering the China market. So he's in an ideal position to talk about the subject of cash flow in China. So with no further ado, I will hand across to Andy, who I'm sure will give a more detailed introduction to himself.
Thank you very much, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great, that's perfect. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, so this morning I'm going to share some of my experiences on cash flow management in China. So if we could turn over the first slide, please, Mark. First, just to briefly introduce myself to you all. I've lived and worked in China for about 15 years. I've had my own company there for the past 7 years. And the heart of what we do is that we run the financial and HR back-end processes, particularly for European SMEs coming into China, so that they don't have to go through the disruption and the expense of setting up their own company in China. So as a result, I run the finances for a range of clients. So I've a lot of experience seeing and dealing with cash flow issues that a lot of companies entering the market have. So the talk today really is for anybody who's considering entering China. A few of the things to bear in mind and to understand before you go in, but I hope some of it will also be relevant for any of you that are already operating in China and facing these types of challenges. And the reason really to talk about cash flow is that cash flow is a problem for anyone running a business anywhere in the world, but China does present some particular challenges. And of course, the issue with cash flow is you can be a profitable company, but still, if you've not got your cash flow right, the more you grow, the more it will become an issue. So it's something to think about and get right from the start. Can we turn over the slide then, please, Mark? Thank you. So before we cover the 6 areas of advice and expertise, the first thing I want to talk about a little bit is credit and access to credit in China. And
Andy, just before
this really is
Andy, sorry to interrupt you. Just before we go ahead and move into that, we thought it might be a good idea. Through the course of the presentation, we have a few polls that we can run. So we thought it would be a good idea just to run the first poll. So the first poll is just to check where everyone is based, just to see how many of you are in the UK, how many of you are in China. So you should see the poll question pop up in front of you. So it'd be great if you can just answer that. We'll just give that a few seconds. Okay. So we can see that the majority of people are in the UK, 53% outside of London, 40% in London, and the rest presumably in China. And I know, Andy, that you will, as you go through, you will. There's a couple of other questions that you've got for the audience that will poll people through as we go on. So I'll return return to Andy now, so you can move ahead with the presentation.
Great, thanks very much, Mark. Yeah, that's very helpful. So it sounds like everybody's in the UK. So yeah, I attend a lot of trainings because I'm a finance professional on cash flow, and it always surprises me when I deal with people. And I was on a call yesterday. We were discussing cash flow management in the US, just how prevalent access to credit is over there, and people can get lines of credit, overdraft. You can have your receivables financed. You can have your exports credits financed. There's all sorts of products available from the banks for short-term financing for SMEs. Now, in China, we have access, particularly as a foreign company, to really none of that at all, which is a big problem. It means that you need to manage the entire business out of cash flow coming in from customers. Now, this is kind of a pervasive thing in the market, so it's something that will affect not just your business, but also those people upstream and downstream of you as well. So your suppliers and your customers, they'll all be facing similar types of constraints. And like I say, this is particularly an issue for foreign companies, but local companies, they have the same challenges. So not only is it harder to get credit from financial institutions, but it's harder to get terms from suppliers, for example, as well, because they're not able to go to their bank and say, look, we need to provide this customer with 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. So it has all sorts of knock-on effects to the business. I would say that the one big exception to this is if you're able to have access to land. This really is the one thing that if you can leverage, it does give strong access to credit, unless you're a large listed company or a state-owned company. So if you're considering a market entry and land is something that you're being offered as part of the deal, that can often be a very attractive proposition, not just because of the value of the land itself, but because it really is the only key that can effectively unlock credit if you're a market entrant out there. In my experience, the only time that I've ever managed to get bank credit for one of my customers was, and this was a company doing many millions of dollars of turnover already in market, and they were able to get, with the help of a credit guarantee company at a total cost of about 10% annually, a line of credit whereby the bank paid directly to suppliers, so it wasn't even money that the company could touch, and it had to be underwritten by property, and the property was valued at about 70 or 80% of its market value. So really quite very, very challenging terms. And in the end, actually, the customer didn't go for it. So the one big takeaway to think about from this for you is if you're going into the China market, you need to go in with your eyes open and be aware that you will ultimately be the backstop for cash flow for your China subsidiary, because it'll be very, very hard to tap other local sources of credit. Okay, so with that in mind, let's get on with our six secrets of how you can mitigate some of these challenges. And the first one to mention is about contract negotiation. Now it's well known that contract enforcement in China is a challenge. It's very hard if you have something that's only protected by contract terms, sometimes to have that enforced. And this is another reason why credit is not nearly as prevalent in the market as it is out here, because a promise to pay through a contract isn't as powerful a tool as it is over here. So that means that when you're at the stage of contract negotiation with a partner, be it a customer or a supplier, you can't expect to use the contract and its protection to extract value. And you really need to think in terms of actual leverage. Let me just give a quick example from my own experience. A few years ago I was buying and selling steel, and we had a contract with a supplier whereby they had to provide a particular technical grade of steel. And in the contract, I thought I was pretty clever at the time, and I got this term in there whereby if they provided steel that wasn't to standard, then they would have to compensate us 10 times the value of the contract. And I thought, well, I was covered either way, because either I make money from my customer, or if the supplier doesn't get it right, then I make money from them instead. And in the end, they supplied steel that didn't meet the technical requirements. So when I went back to them to claim my 10 times, we ended up in a dispute, and it was unenforceable. They didn't see it the way that I saw it, and there were all sorts of terms and means that they used in order to avoid that type of liability. And so that was a real wake-up call for me. And these days, with all of my customers, I always say, if you're going to talk contract terms with clients, you actually have to have points of leverage with the client around payment terms. And the types of leverage that means typically it involves if you're selling something, is making your product somehow unusable unless payment comes through. So, for example, I have a customer that do design, so they're very careful to watermark all of the designs that they do and issue to their customers, and that's always payment needs to be received before watermarks will be removed. So do think about, for your products, what types of means that you can use to get leverage in negotiations. Also, it's quite common in China for payment terms, obviously it's like anywhere, to be structured, and for there to be a final 10%, for example, on completion of project. And it's quite common to not see that 10%, because the type of leverage terms that I'm talking about sometimes very hard to enforce if you have a large client. So often people will price with that in mind. Or if you do see it, then it can be a very, very lengthy process. The next area, if we could move on to the next slide, please, Mark, to talk about, that's really quite unfamiliar for people outside of China, is the whole idea of fapiao. And fapiao are tax invoices. So in China, there isn't really quite the concept of commercial invoice that we have over here. If you're asked to invoice a client, typically it means that what they want is tax invoices. Now, every company that's registered with the tax office in China has a special printing machine in their office that's linked directly to the tax bureau that they use to print these fapiao. And so that means that the tax bureau has an up-to-the-minute record of all of your billings to your clients. And similarly, when you're paying your suppliers, you have to make sure that you get their fapiao in hand before you make a payment to them, because otherwise you'll have no provable record that tax has been paid, and you won't be able to offset the tax that you have to pay for the fapiao that you've issued to receive from your clients. So, like I said, there's this kind of yin and yang in China of payments. If money moves in one direction, fapiao have to move in the other direction. And this is something that I always see managers that are new in country missing in their contract negotiations, to be clear to say that fapiao need to be received in hand before any payments will be made to suppliers. And also you need to watch the quarter end, because settlement of corporate taxes happens every quarter, and it's quite easy to get quite badly caught out with this. If you've issued a lot of fapiao and you haven't got enough cost fapiao coming in, you can end up with quite a painful corporation tax at the end of the quarter. So you really need a good finance team to be on top of this, and you need to be aware of how all this works. And FATIA is a very broad topic that I could spend a long time on, but for today's purposes, just be aware that that's something that's very important in getting your cash management right. Next up, can we move on to the slide? Thanks, Mark. Obviously, like anywhere, there are various levers for cash flow management in China, and one of them is payables to all sorts of suppliers. And the reason I've got vegetables up here in my picture is it relates to, so I have a client that they're a manufacturing company from France, and they've had a lot of challenges with cash flow this year, and as a result they've had some quite tense negotiations with suppliers. And in some cases they've had to say to their suppliers, look, we're not going to be able to pay you this year. And in China, payment, typically settlement, happens around Spring Festival. So you tend to have this month and around sort of January time where everybody around the country is going around and trying to settle all their debts from their suppliers and vendors. And it's tough if you're unable to settle with people at that time of year. And that's been the case with them this year. And one of the vendors came in and he was asking for his money, and they said, sorry, there's nothing we can do for you this year. And so then typically these types of negotiations will happen over a meal. And they were ordering lunch. And it was very interesting because this guy over lunch, when we came to order the dishes, didn't order anything with meat in it. And it was this kind of concept of, if there's no money, then we won't eat meat. And part of it on his part was registering protest, but also there is this kind of acceptance out there that everybody is kind of in the same boat, and people do understand if payments are missed or if you've got cash flow problems, because they're having similar problems themselves. So these things are more negotiable than they would be typically back at home. Now obviously you need to be very, very careful with this, and there's different sort of levels of supplier. But those type of negotiations over a lunch, over a dinner, to say to people, look, we're going to be late in our payments, are probably more common than you'd expect out here. So you often find yourself in that situation, having to make those kind of explanations, and typically you buy people off with promises of more business in the coming year, as long as they're able to accept some extra time on payments for the previous year. Now this works with vendors, sometimes even with staff. I mean, I have had customers that have had to certainly late pay bonuses, if there's any bonuses, sometimes even salaries, if you have a strong team, but not with the tax office. There are some suppliers where these types of means really you're not going to get any sympathy for. Now the best place to pay things forward is with customers, and I've been in this situation myself many times. A friend of mine who runs a business in consultancy and training, he had a crisis recently. So he went to all of his customers and said, look, we need you guys at a discount to buy yearly memberships. And really his purpose for that was just to tide over cash flow. So customers is always a good place to go if you offer the right terms in order to cover cash flow gaps. So should we get on with the second poll now, Mark? Would this be a good,
I will launch that. We'll launch that now. So this question is, are you a business owner, a financial professional within a company, an independent financial professional, or other? So we'll just give that a few seconds. Just a reminder to everyone as well to feed through any questions as we go through that you may have for Andy as things come up that you maybe like a bit more detail on. Just use the panel to send that through.
Yeah, it'd be great to get some questions, and also we'll have some time at the end for Q&A.
Okay, so the poll, yeah, we're seeing there 57%. So the majority are business owners. So yeah, they're very interesting. So a lot of owners actually dialing into the webinar. Okay, go ahead, Andy.
Good. Well, folk like me then. So the fourth area I'm going to talk about a little bit is how you structure your assets in China, because this is going to have a really big impact on cash flow. This is a technique that we learned from a venture capital company when we were fundraising a few years back. And their modus operandi in China was that they invested in manufacturing companies and then re-engineered them to outsource as many of the functions as they could, including the manufacturing, and really focused on some key areas of product development. And the reason for this was entirely to do with cash flow. And it was all about spreading the pain of cash flow over a network of suppliers. And the net result of which was that they were able to offer preferential payment terms in the market, which then allowed them to grow market share. And it had been a very successful strategy for that. So again, this French irrigation company that's been a client of mine for a few years now, we followed this methodology in building up their business. So all the manufacturing has been outsourced amongst several factories around the north of the country. Their financial operations were outsourced to us. HR operations partly outsourced to us, partly outsourced to FESCO. So all they had was just a rep offer, just very, very light asset structure. And in the first 4 or 5 years or 3 or 4 years of their growth in China, this has really served them very, very well, because it's a market where cash flow has become the deciding factor in terms of who stands and who falls. And they've been able to ride out the course, and they're still going strong. Now, obviously, it has its limits. When you reach a certain asset size, you want to bring some key assets in-house. Maybe if you're considering a sale of the business, or if things become so valuable that you can only trust them in your own hands. But it is an important strategy to, particularly, like I said, from a cash flow point of view, not just to gain competitive advantage sometimes, just even to survive in the market. Next slide, please, Mark. Now, sooner or later, you will be in the situation, if you're selling into the Chinese market, of facing collections issues. There'll be people that don't pay on time, don't pay according to the terms that you've agreed, and you'll have to go and start having these discussions around collections from them. And typically you see various stages of this. First of all is spotting some of the warning signs, some of the silly buggers type behavior. Oh, finance team are away, they're on holiday. Or people will send through scanned copies of bank payments that are a bit out of focus and you can't quite see. And when you spot those kind of warning signs, then it's usually time to go and send somebody around to talk to first the finance department, then the top management, if you're not getting any joy there. And oftentimes it'll be something to do with the commercial terms, or somebody wants something in return for a payment, and can be resolved there, but not always. I've actually been on the receiving end of this as well, and there's a very active industry in China of people who go around doing collections. One of my customers has a full-time member of staff, used to be one of the drivers, whose job it is just to go around customers non-stop, chasing them for collections. I remember one time I had a decorating company that I had a disagreement with. They hadn't decorated a store in the way that I wanted. And they sent a guy around, and he sat in the chair opposite me in my office and shouted for an entire morning, and until I paid up, because he knew that if he caused enough disruption and caused enough embarrassment to me in front of my staff, then I'd pay up. So those types of means and methods, you can hire professionals to do. This guy wasn't an employee of the decorating company, and I personally have a little black book of people not quite like that, but professional agencies that I share with clients if they do get into that kind of situation where they need to go and send somebody. And often these guys, they'll work on a percentage basis of whatever's settled. But more commonly, people find themselves in the situation of having to offer some kind of a rebate or a discount in order to collect. And so those types of negotiations, again, over dinners, can be a common part of the collections process. So expect to have to ask, and expect to have to work on those relationships, and relationships with a big R, including all manners of keeping those individuals happy in those organizations in order to collect. And finally, the nuclear option. Next slide, please, Mark. If all else fails, there is the option in China of going to what's called Dolly, which is these underground high-interest loans, where really the only thing that you underwrite the loan with is your own personal health. I do have one customer that had to resort to this at one point, and it was 6% a month was what they had to pay. So it's terms can really be quite painful. But it really is the option of last resort. But it's a very, very active market in China because of all the reasons that I've stated above. And it's the sort of thing that you'd use really just to plug a very, very short-term gap if you knew you had money in. Because if you let that type of borrowing go on for a long time, then it really can be quite a painful process. Right, last slide really is, I want to end on a positive note because it's not all doom and gloom. It is possible to run a successful business in China. And it's just looking at the future because it's a very exciting time to be doing business in China right now. The appetite for reform at the moment is higher than I've seen it for a long time. China tends to go through these peaks and troughs of reform. You tend to go through quite long periods of same old, and then you get this burst of activity where things really change. Like we had this in the late 90s when Zhurongji was reforming all the SOEs. And we're seeing it again now. And particularly it's very, very interesting to see what's happening and changing in the finance industry. And there really is genuine change afoot. I went into the bank around Spring Festival this year, and ICBC were offering a fixed term, their own product, if you locked up money in the bank, and they were offering 6% if you locked the money up for 2 months. And this is unheard of in China. I mean, typically you go to the bank and you get the government rate of whatever it is, 1.2, 1.3%. And the reason the banks are having to really pay much more than they traditionally had done on deposits is because there is finally competition for credit in the market. Now, the online lenders like Alipay and people like that are just hoovering up credit in the market, and they're now starting to make loans. You can now get you can buy direct bonds from state-owned enterprises because they're having so much trouble getting loans from the state-owned banks because they're coming under credit constraint. And so the net result of all of this is that what I see happening is that the market for credit is starting to get commercialized, whereas in the past it's been entirely state bank dominated. There's more and more of these private banks that are being regularized and emerging. You see more and more adverts around town for people offering loans on receivables, short-term credit, and from the major banks. So currently, as a foreign company, it's very hard to access. But the market for locals is really starting to emerge now. And like I say, what I see is, more importantly, from the government, senior government, the will to continue these types of reforms. So hopefully, give it a few years, and we'll see a more normal market in China. But for the time being, many of the constraints that I've discussed today are still in place, and I hope a few of these pointers have been helpful for you in terms of planning your business entry into China. And with that, I think we have a final poll before we can open up for questions and answers.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. We have a couple actually, so we'll start with the first one, which is just really about what stage of market entry everyone is at. So whether new to China or already have a business in China or simply considering. So we'll give that one a few seconds. I'll also move on in a second to the final slide. Again, any questions that people have, we've already had a couple of questions come in. So let's just close that poll. So we can see there that around about half of people are in the process of entering, and quite a few are already there. So a lot of the issues that you've talked about today, quite important. I mean, one question that we did have, Andy, from Claire was around, obviously, a lot of the tips that you've shared today are around operating a business locally in China and cash flow for your China woofie or your China business. Do you have any tips on companies that might just be sort of dealing with Chinese customers or suppliers from here in the UK? Claire's asking about, she's had some problems dealing with getting payment from a Chinese customer, and just wondered if you had any tips on that.
Right, so this is for people that are exporting out of the UK.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, in the past, many of us who operate in the kind of business between China and UK space, a lot of us, myself included, we worked in the sourcing business, and helping Western companies to purchase goods from China, and payment terms were predictably the same. You had really, you could buy X works or FOB, and always you'd have to pay in advance. It was, it's just the same, because that's partly it's to do with the mentality of the market out there. That's how people deal with each other, and there wasn't enough trust in international payment for people to accept payment terms, unless a letter of credit was such that they would have guarantees from their own bank that they would get paid for the goods, maybe a letter of credit at site. So personally, I think that we need to have the same mentality in reverse if we're exporting to China, and a lot of it is about payment terms up front. Now, if you're in the situation where you've already signed a deal with somebody and you've shipped goods and you're awaiting payment, that's obviously a much more challenging situation. I mean, I'd have to understand the situation a little bit more, but it kind of depends on the size of the receivable. I mean, if it's a significant amount that merits sending people out there to go and meet with the factory, possibly hiring a collection agency locally, maybe even taking legal action. But if it's a smaller amount, then a lot of people have gotten burned in that way and had to write those receivables off. But really, it's about structuring the payment terms quite aggressively when the deal is set up in the first place. Maybe I could have a chat with Claire separately and understand her situation in a little bit more detail and see if there's any way that we can help.
Yeah, that's great, Andy. I know that from our experience, that it's often you really need to understand sort of the detail of what a company is doing, what the specifics are. But certainly, I guess there's more scope for controlling cash flow where you have a physical presence in China than if you're just dealing from a distance with Chinese companies that you may not have even met with. So there are some challenges there. Another question from John. Just really, John was keen to know a bit more about LNP, what you guys do, and how you can sort of help businesses with managing their cash flow, particularly those that are maybe in the process of setting up in China. So I don't know if you're able to sort of share a bit more information about what it is that you guys can help with.
Well, would you mind just flipping to the very final slide, because my contact details are on there. So thanks. Anybody that wants to get in touch to discuss more, then that's my email address. So setting up a company in China, it takes, let's say, 3 to 6 months for the whole registration process to go through. You have to hire an agent to do it. He'll charge you somewhere between 30 to 100,000 RMB. You have to put registered capital into the company. That's a legal requirement. You have to have an office which has got a registered address. And then you have to have a finance team, and it needs to go through annual audits. You need to figure out all the taxes. So it's a hurdle for people going in. It's not like setting up a company in Hong Kong where it's a day or two, and it's very, very simple and easy asset to manage. So what we do is we help companies going into market by essentially allowing them in the first few years of their business to avoid jumping through that hoop. So we manage all of their back office processes for them. So that includes things like billing clients, issuing tax invoices to clients, taking payments, paying suppliers, collecting invoices from suppliers, and making sure that all the taxes have been paid, hiring staff. If they're foreign staff, we'll get the visas issued for staff. So it allows you to safely run a business in China without actually having to set up the entity yourself. And there's a lot of knock-on benefits of that. You know, you get an experienced finance team, myself essentially as CFO, without having the expense. And it's a good way of mitigating the risk of market entry, because rather than having all that fixed cost, we just work on a percentage basis. So if business is good, you know, you have to share a bit of the profits with us, but if business is quiet, then you haven't had to spend out of pocket. So it's like a stepping stone, really. Maybe you've sent people out on some exploratory visits to do research, maybe to find some potential distributors or people to sell to out there. Before you take the leap to actually setting up your own woofie, we can bridge the gap.
Okay, thanks Andy. No, that's perfect. I'm sure that anyone who wants to follow up can do so separately with you. Got another couple of questions. Just have a quick look. This one is from Sarah. She's saying we experience extremely long payment cycles for payment in foreign currency from Chinese customers to the UK account. Yeah. It seems to be linked to them obtaining a tax certificate before payment can be made. Yeah. I don't know if you can explain a bit more about that. Is that a common issue? Is that something
that's a very good point. So foreign currency payments have to go through the State Administration of Foreign Exchange, SAFE, and it is a lengthy, like multiple week, so 2 to 3 week process to complete that. I'm assuming that the person is in a service industry and not actually selling goods. For goods, it's a little bit quicker because goods come through the port, so you get all of the documentation to prove that the goods have been imported, and it's much faster to make foreign currency payments for a goods payment, and you can get that done even within a week. But if it's a service contract, you have to go down to SAFE with all of the service contract, who the other party is, and it's like I say, it's a 2 or 3 week quite lengthy approval process before they'll release that foreign currency. So that is actually quite a normal part of business, and if your client or partner out there is telling you that, then you can take that at face value.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, Sarah confirms that they are a services supplier, so that might be the issue then. And I guess that's there's no real way to kind of get around that. That's just a formal process that's in place, and needs.
One thing to add to that, though, is that make sure that you get the proof of tax payment from the partner there, because you can offset your UK taxes. So they should be paying, and it depends on the industry, but probably around 6 or 7%. And if they give you the proof of tax payment on that, or in some cases the withholding taxes can be 17%, you can take that and offset it against your corporation tax in the UK.
Oh, that's a very useful tip as well. Thanks for that. I think thank you to Andy, and thank you for all of the questions. I think we'll probably draw the webinar to a close at that point. Maybe if we just finish up with the final poll question. So I'll just launch that now. Just sort of really to understand those of you that are experiencing cash flow difficulties in China, and for that, how many of you have seen that as a problem? So I'll just give that a couple of seconds to work through. Okay, so we can see that, well, hopefully this webinar has been useful in educating people, but quite a few of you not that familiar with cash flow in China, so still learning about the issue, and a lot of you concerned about it. So, you know, we hope that today has been a useful exercise for you. Please do contact Andy with any follow-up questions, or indeed contact us here at the China Britain Business Council. So I'd just like to say thanks again to Andy for today. Final slide there, just a bit of an overview of our webinar format. We hold webinars once every week or two. If you go to the CBBC website, then you'll be able to download all of our previous webinars and also access information on upcoming events and future webinars.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. I hope that's been of service to everybody. And if anybody's got any questions, I'm really more than happy to help. Provide any suggestions or advice, just get in touch. And my contact details are up there on the slide.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, thanks for joining. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Have a nice day.